Most people wake up every morning and immediately start listening to a voice. That voice speaks before anyone else does. It comments on how you look, how you feel, what you're capable of, and what kind of day this is going to be. And here's the uncomfortable truth. That voice is shaping your life far more than your boss, your family, or your circumstances ever could. Now imagine this. What if the quality of that voice changed? What if for just 21 days, you spoke to yourself differently, not louder, not more aggressively, but more intentionally? Stay with me, because by the end of this talk, you won't just understand why this works. You'll know how to do it and why most people never experience this kind of transformation. Let's start with something simple. Every organization rises or falls based on leadership. And the most important leader you will ever follow is you. Your inner voice is your invisible leader. If it doubts, you hesitate. If it criticizes, you shrink. If it believes, you move. Most people don't fail because they lack talent. They fail because the voice inside them keeps asking, who do you think you are? Instead of what's possible if you try. That brings us to language. Words are not just sounds, they are instructions. The way you speak to yourself shapes what you believe, and what you believe determines what you do when things get hard. If your internal language says, I'm bad at this, your brain looks for proof. If it says, I'm learning, your brain looks for solutions. Same situation, different words, completely different outcome. Now, why 21 days? Because transformation doesn't happen in a moment of motivation. It happens through consistency. Neuroscience shows us that repeated thoughts create neural pathways. In simple terms, what you practice internally becomes automatic externally. You don't need to feel confident on day one. You need to practice alignment, which brings us to one of the biggest mistakes people make. They try to eliminate negative thoughts. That never works. The goal isn't to silence self-criticism. The goal is to replace it. Instead of saying, I'm not good enough, you say, I am becoming better than I was yesterday. Instead of, I always fail, you say, failure is feedback and I'm listening. This isn't pretending. This is choosing language that supports growth instead of sabotage. Here's the shift most people miss. Results don't change identity. Identity changes results. You don't say, once I succeed, I'll believe in myself. You say, I believe in who I'm becoming even before the results show up. When you talk to yourself like someone who is responsible, capable, and learning, your behavior starts to match that identity. And after 21 days, something powerful happens. The voice that once questioned you starts encouraging you. The voice that once doubted starts directing you. The voice that once held you back becomes the reason you move forward. Not because life suddenly got easier, but because you changed the conversation. So here's the challenge for the next 21 days. Speak to yourself like this, like someone you're responsible for leading, like someone you believe has potential, like someone whose future matters. Because when you change how you talk to yourself, you don't just change your mindset. You change your direction, and direction, not motivation, is what changes a life. Your inner voice is your invisible leader. It speaks before every decision, before every action, before every moment where you either step forward or pull back. Long before the world responds to you, this voice has already given you instructions. Most people think leadership is something external, a title, a position, a person standing at the front. But the truth is, the most powerful leader you will ever follow lives inside your own mind. Whether your life expands or contracts depends on whether that voice is guiding you with intention or running on autopilot. Every day, that voice tells you what you deserve, what you are capable of, and what risks are safe to take. It whispers when you wake up, and it speaks loudly when things get difficult. If it tells you that you are behind, you will rush in panic. If it tells you that you are not enough, you will hesitate even when opportunities are right in front of you. And if it tells you that growth can wait until tomorrow, you will slowly trade your potential for comfort. This is not motivation or positivity. This is leadership, because leadership is simply influence, and nothing influences your behavior more consistently than the voice you hear when no one else is around. Most people never question this voice. They assume it is the truth. They confuse familiarity with accuracy. But your inner voice is not born wise. It is trained. It is shaped by past experiences, failures, criticism, praise, and the stories you absorbed before you were old enough to challenge them. Over time, it becomes a script. And if you do not rewrite that script, it will continue to lead you in the same direction, no matter how much you say you want change. You cannot expect a different future while following the same internal instructions. Think about moments when pressure shows up. Pressure does not create character, it reveals leadership. Under stress, you do not rise to your goals, you fall to the level of your inner dialogue. When things go wrong, does your voice say, this is hard, but I can learn? Or does it say, this always happens to me? When you fail, does it say, I just and try again? Or does it say, see, this is why you shouldn't have tried? One voice builds resilience, the other quietly erodes it. Both feel normal if you have been listening to them long enough. Your invisible leader also decides how you interpret the world. Two people can face the same obstacle and walk away with completely different outcomes, not because of talent or luck, but because of the meaning their inner voice assigns to the experience. One voice says, this is feedback. The other says, this is rejection. One says, this delay is preparation. The other says, this delay is proof I'm stuck. Meaning shapes emotion. Emotion shapes action. Action shapes results. It all starts with that unseen leadership. If you want to change your life, you do not start by changing your circumstances. You start by changing who is leading you internally. Strong leaders are not loud, they are clear. A strong inner voice does not scream affirmations or deny reality. It speaks with calm authority. It tells you the truth without tearing you down. It acknowledges fear without surrendering to it. It does not pretend challenges are easy, but it refuses to let challenges define your identity. There is a difference between self-talk that is kind and self-talk that is effective. Kindness without honesty creates complacency. Honesty without compassion creates paralysis. Your invisible leader must balance both. It should say, this matters, so show up, not you're terrible if you don't get this right. It should say, you're not there yet, not you'll never get there. The words are subtle, but the direction they point you toward is completely different. Pay attention to how your inner voice speaks when no one is watching. Does it rush you, shame you, compare you? Or does it ground you, focus you, and remind you of what you can control? Leadership is not about controlling outcomes. It is about controlling responses. The strongest people are not those with the loudest confidence, but those with the most disciplined inner dialogue. They do not silence doubt, they manage it. They do not eliminate fear, they give it context. Your inner voice also determines the standards you live by. It decides what you tolerate, what you excuse, and what you improve. If your voice constantly negotiates with your goals, you will live in almosts and maybes. If it holds you to clear standards while allowing room to learn, you will build momentum. Standards are not pressure, they are clarity. And clarity is a form of self-respect. Over time, your invisible leader becomes your identity. You do not act based on who you wish to be. You act based on who your inner voice says you are. If it labels you as inconsistent, you will subconsciously prove it right. If it identifies you as someone who finishes, you will look for ways to follow through even when motivation fades. Identity-driven behavior is powerful because it feels natural. That is why changing your inner voice is not about hype, it is about alignment. The world will always try to lead you. Opinions, algorithms, expectations, and comparisons will constantly speak into your life. If your inner leader is weak, external noise will take over. You will chase approval, react emotionally, and measure your worth by outcomes you cannot fully control. But when your inner voice is steady, outside pressure loses its power. You can listen without being owned by it. You can learn without losing yourself. Your inner voice is with you in every quiet moment, every setback, every choice no one applauds. It is either preparing you or protecting you from growth. It is either reminding you of your responsibility or giving you excuses to avoid it. You cannot fire this leader, but you can train it. You can choose the tone, the language, and the standards it enforces. Leadership is not something you step into one day. You are already being led every single moment. The only question is whether your invisible leader is taking you where you actually want to go. Language creates belief, and belief creates action. Long before behavior changes, before habits form, before results appear in your life, words are already at work shaping what you think is possible. Not just the words you speak out loud, but the ones you repeat silently to yourself every day. Those words are not neutral. They are instructions. They frame how you interpret the world, how you interpret yourself, and what you expect to happen next. When language changes, belief follows. And when belief shifts, action becomes inevitable. Most people underestimate the power of the language they live inside. They assume words are just descriptions of reality, when in truth they are architects of reality. If you constantly describe your life as stressful, unfair, or stuck, your mind adapts to that story and looks for evidence to support it. If you describe challenges as opportunities to grow, your mind searches for options instead of exits. The brain is not designed to seek truth. It is designed to seek consistency. It aligns your behavior with the language you use most often, even when that language is working against you. Belief is not something you suddenly decide to have. It is built slowly through repetition. Every sentence you tell yourself is a vote for the kind of person you believe you are. When you say, I'm bad at this, you are not just expressing frustration, you are casting a belief that limits future effort. When you say, I'm learning, you keep the door open for progress. The difference may sound small, but over time it changes how much energy you bring to the task, how long you persist, and how you recover from setbacks. Belief does not come from motivation, it comes from familiarity. You believe what you hear often, especially when it comes from your own voice. Action is the visible outcome of invisible belief. You do not wake up one day and randomly behave differently. You act in alignment with what you believe to be true about yourself and the world. If you believe effort will not matter, you conserve energy. If you believe failure defines you, you avoid risk. If you believe growth is possible, you experiment, adjust, and continue. Action follows belief as naturally as breathing follows oxygen. That is why trying to force action without changing language rarely lasts. You can push yourself for a while, but eventually your behavior will return to match your deepest beliefs. The most dangerous language is not negative language, it is absolute language. Words like always, never, everyone, and no one turn temporary experiences into permanent identities. One mistake becomes, I always mess things up. One delay becomes, nothing ever works for me. These sentences feel true in the moment, but they harden belief in a way that narrows future action. When belief narrows, options disappear. You stop seeing paths forward not because they are gone, but because your language told your brain to stop looking. Strong performers Resilient people and effective leaders are intentional with their language. They do not deny difficulty, but they describe it accurately. Accuracy matters because exaggerated language creates exaggerated emotions. Saying, "This is challenging," produces a different response than saying, "This is impossible." One invites problem solving. The other invites shutdown. Language is a steering wheel. A slight turn, repeated over time, changes direction completely. This does not mean pretending everything is positive. It means choosing language that keeps you in motion. There is power in saying, "I don't know yet," instead of "I don't know." There is power in saying, "This didn't work," instead of "I failed." These phrases preserve belief while still honoring reality. They keep your identity intact while allowing your strategy to change. When belief stays intact, action can continue without emotional collapse. Your language also shapes how you respond under pressure. In stressful moments, your vocabulary shrinks to what is most familiar. That is why training your language in calm moments matters. When pressure hits, you fall back on practiced phrases. If your default language is self-criticism, pressure will amplify it. If your default language is constructive and grounded, pressure will activate focus instead of fear. You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your language. Belief is not confidence. Confidence is a feeling, belief is a framework. You can feel uncertain and still believe in your capacity to figure things out. The language you choose determines which one you build. Saying, "I feel unsure, but I can learn," allows action to move forward even without confidence. Waiting to feel confident before acting keeps belief fragile and dependent on emotion. Sustainable action is belief-driven, not mood-driven. Over time, your language becomes your identity. You begin to describe yourself in certain ways, and eventually you stop questioning those descriptions. "I'm not disciplined. I'm just not creative. I'm not a leader." These statements are not facts, they are repeated conclusions. Each time you say them, belief strengthens and action aligns to confirm them. Identity is not discovered. It is constructed through language. The same process works in the opposite direction. When you describe yourself as someone who shows up, someone who learns from mistakes, someone who finishes what they start, your behavior slowly adjusts to protect that identity. You look for evidence that supports it. You recover faster from failure because failure no longer threatens who you believe you are. Belief becomes a stabilizer instead of a limitation. Language also influences how you relate to time. Saying, "I don't have time," creates scarcity and stress. Saying, "I'm choosing not to prioritize this right now," restores agency. One makes you a victim of circumstances. The other makes you a decision maker. Belief follows that sense of control, and action becomes more deliberate. The words you choose either give power away or bring it back. Nothing changes until the internal narrative changes. You can consume information, set goals, and make plans, but if your language stays the same, belief stays the same, and action eventually collapses. Lasting change begins when you listen closely to how you speak to yourself and decide whether that language is building the life you want or reinforcing the life you are trying to leave. Language is not just communication, it is creation. Consistency beats intensity, and that truth quietly challenges almost everything we've been taught about change. We live in a world that celebrates extremes: overnight success, massive effort, dramatic transformation. We admire the sprint, the burst of energy, the moment where someone decides to change everything at once. But real change, the kind that lasts beyond motivation and survives boredom, is built differently. It is built through small actions repeated long enough to become part of who you are. That is why 21 days matters, not because it is magical, but because it is long enough to interrupt your old patterns and short enough to feel achievable. Intensity feels powerful because it is emotional. When you are intense, you feel alive, committed, driven. You promise yourself that this time will be different. You go all in. But intensity depends on emotion, and emotion is unstable. It rises and falls with sleep, stress, results, and feedback. When emotion drops, intensity disappears and the habit collapses with it. Consistency, on the other hand, does not ask how you feel. It asks what you are willing to repeat. It is quiet, sometimes boring, often uncelebrated, but it compounds in ways intensity never can. The problem with intensity is not effort, it is sustainability. You can push hard for a day, a week, even a month, but if the behavior does not fit into your life, it will eventually break under its own weight. Consistency scales down the effort so it can scale up the result. It shifts the question from how much can I do today to what can I do every day? That shift changes everything because it respects human nature instead of fighting it. 21 days matters because it is the point where repetition starts to challenge identity. In the beginning, action feels forced. You have to remind yourself, you have to negotiate with resistance. You feel like someone pretending to be disciplined, but when you repeat a behavior daily, something subtle changes. The action stops feeling foreign. Your brain begins to expect it. What once required willpower starts to require less negotiation. You are no longer proving that you can do it once, you are proving that you are someone who does it regularly. Consistency works because the brain learns through exposure, not intensity. Neural pathways strengthen through repetition. The mind trusts what it sees often. Every day you show up even a small way, you send a signal to yourself, this matters, and I follow through. Belief grows from evidence, and consistency provides evidence. Intensity provides a story. Stories inspire, but evidence convinces. Many people quit too early because they mistake the absence of visible results for the absence of progress. The first phase of consistency is invisible. You are building structure before you see outcomes. You are laying foundation before anything impressive appears on the surface. 21 days is often where people give up because the excitement has faded, but the payoff has not arrived. That is exactly why it matters. Staying consistent past the emotional drop-off is what separates intention from transformation. Consistency also changes how you relate to failure. When you are intense, failure feels catastrophic because everything is riding on a single burst of effort. When you are consistent, failure becomes data. One bad day does not define you because there's another day already planned. You stop asking, did I succeed or fail? And start asking, did I show up? That mindset reduces shame and increases resilience. You no longer need perfection to continue. The power of 21 days is that it teaches patience in a culture addicted to speed. It forces you to slow down and trust the process. It reminds you that growth is not dramatic most of the time. It is repetitive. Showing up when it feels ordinary is what rewires your standards. You stop needing motivation and start relying on rhythm. Rhythm is stronger than motivation because it does not argue with your emotions, it moves with or without them. Consistency also builds self-trust. Every time you keep a small promise to yourself, you repair something internal. Many people struggle not because they lack discipline, but because they no longer trust themselves. They have made big promises and broken them too many times. Intensity often makes this worse by encouraging unrealistic commitments. Consistency rebuilds trust slowly. It lowers the promise and raises the follow-through. After 21 days, you are no longer asking, can I do this? You are reminding yourself, I already am. Small actions repeated daily also reduce resistance. Starting is often the hardest part. When the action is small, starting becomes easier. Once you start, momentum carries you forward. Over time, the habit grows naturally. What began as 5 minutes becomes 10. What began as one page becomes a chapter. Consistency allows growth without forcing it. It respects progression instead of demanding transformation overnight. There's also a psychological shift that happens around the 3-week mark. The behavior starts to feel like part of your routine instead of an interruption. Your environment adjusts. Your schedule adapts. You stop explaining the habit to yourself and others. You simply do it. That shift matters because identity follows behavior. You do not become consistent because you believe in yourself. You believe in yourself because you have been consistent. Intensity wants results now. Consistency is willing to wait. Intensity asks, how fast can this change? Consistency asks, how long can I sustain this? One is driven by urgency, the other by ownership. Urgency burns out. Ownership builds longevity. The people who achieve meaningful change are rarely the most intense in the beginning. They are the ones who refuse to stop when it stops feeling exciting. 21 days is not the finish line. It is the proof of concept. It is the moment where you demonstrate to yourself that change does not require drama, only commitment. It is where effort becomes easier, resistance becomes quieter, and the habit starts to work with you instead of against you. You are no longer chasing a new version of yourself. You are practicing being that person daily. Consistency beats intensity because life is not lived in bursts, it is lived in days. And when you learn how to win the day over and over again, the years take care of themselves. Replace self-criticism with self-alignment because tearing yourself down has never been a sustainable strategy for growth. Many people believe that being hard on themselves is the same as being disciplined. That harsh inner dialogue is what keeps them sharp, focused, and moving forward. But self-criticism does not create progress, it creates pressure. And pressure without direction leads to burnout, not improvement. Growth does not require punishment. It requires alignment between who you are, what you value, and how you act each day. Self-criticism focuses on what is wrong with you. It highlights flaws, mistakes, and gaps between where you are and where you think you should be. It speaks in absolutes, turning a single misstep into a character flaw. When you criticize yourself, you are not solving a problem, you are attacking your identity. And when identity feels under threat, the mind shifts into defense mode. You procrastinate, avoid, justify, or shut down. What looks like a lack of discipline is often the nervous system protecting itself from constant internal attack. Self-alignment works differently. It does not ask, what is wrong with me? It asks, what matters to me and how can my actions reflect that today? Alignment is about direction, not judgment. It acknowledges mistakes without turning them into labels. It allows you to course correct without collapsing emotionally. When you are aligned, feedback becomes information, not a verdict. You can see what needs to change without feeling like you need to be changed as a person. Self-criticism is loud but vague. It says, do better without explaining how. It says, you're not enough without offering a path forward. Self-alignment is quieter but specific. It points to values, priorities, and standards. It says, this behavior doesn't match who I want to be. And then it looks for the smallest action that brings you back into alignment. One creates shame. The other creates clarity. The problem with self-criticism is not that it points out mistakes. It is that it keeps you stuck in them. When your internal dialogue is harsh, you spend more energy managing emotion than improving performance. You replay failures instead of learning from them. You try to fix yourself instead of fixing the system around you. Over time, you begin to associate effort with pain, and your motivation erodes. You stop trusting yourself because every attempt feels like another opportunity to be disappointed. Self-alignment restores trust. When your focus shifts from judgment to alignment, you become more willing to engage. You no longer need to be perfect to move forward, you only need to be honest. Alignment allows you to say, this didn't go the way I wanted, but I know what matters to me, and I can take one step in that direction now. That mindset keeps you in motion. Momentum grows not from intensity, but from consistency rooted in values. Many people confuse self-criticism with accountability. True accountability is not about punishment, it is about ownership. Ownership asks, what is within my control right now? Self-criticism asks, why am I like this? One question leads to action, the other leads to rumination. Alignment keeps accountability practical. It ties your actions to your values, not to your worth. You are not trying to prove that you are good enough. You are trying to live in a way that feels true. When you are aligned, discomfort becomes meaningful. It is no longer a sign that something is wrong. It is a signal that you are stretching toward what matters. Self-criticism interprets discomfort as failure. Alignment interprets discomfort as growth. That shift changes how long you are willing to stay in challenging situations. You stop quitting on yourself at the first sign of difficulty because the discomfort has a purpose. Self-alignment also changes how you talk to yourself after setbacks. Instead of replaying what you should have done, you reflect on what you can do next. You separate behavior from identity. You can say, that choice didn't serve my values without concluding I am a failure. This separation is critical. It allows learning without shame and responsibility, without self-contempt. Over time, self-criticism narrows your world. You avoid opportunities where you might fail because failure feels like confirmation of your worst beliefs about yourself. Self-alignment expands your world. You take risks because your worth is no longer on trial. You are guided by values, not fear. You become more resilient because your sense of self is anchored internally, not dependent on constant success. Alignment also brings coherence to your decisions. When you know what you value, choices become simpler. You do not need to debate every option or overthink every move. You ask a straightforward question, does this move me closer to the person I want to be? That clarity reduces mental fatigue. Self-criticism drains energy because it keeps you stuck in analysis without resolution. Alignment conserves energy by turning values into filters. Replacing self-criticism with self-alignment does not mean ignoring standards. It means choosing standards that guide rather than punish. It means holding yourself to expectations that are firm but humane. You still strive to improve, but you do so from a place of respect instead of resentment. You work with yourself, not against yourself. When you align your actions with your values, confidence becomes a byproduct. You do not need to convince yourself that you are capable. You prove it through consistent, aligned behavior. Each small act of alignment strengthens your identity. You become someone who shows up not because you are afraid of failing, but because it matters to you. The voice of self-criticism may sound familiar, even motivating at times, but familiarity does not mean effectiveness. Growth does not come from constant self-surveillance and judgment. It comes from clarity, honesty, and alignment. When you stop trying to fix yourself and start aligning yourself, progress becomes sustainable, and self-respect becomes the foundation rather than the reward. Identity comes before results, whether you realize it or not. Long before outcomes show up in your life, before achievements become visible, before success or failure can be measured, there is a quiet decision happening internally about who you believe you are. That belief shapes how you show up, how you respond to challenges, and how long you persist when progress is slow. Results are not random, they are expressions of identity in action. You do not get the results you want and then become the person who deserves them. You become the person first, and the results follow. Most people try to change their lives from the outside in. They chase goal metrics and external validation, hoping that success will finally give them confidence, discipline, or clarity. But when identity stays the same, results rarely last. You can force behavior for a while through pressure or motivation, but eventually you return to what feels familiar. Identity acts like a thermostat. When results rise above what your identity believes is normal, you unconsciously find ways to bring them back down. When results fall, you stay there because it matches how you see yourself. Identity is not what you say you want. It is what you consistently act out. It is revealed in small choices, not big declarations. It shows up in how you talk to yourself when no one is listening, how you respond after a setback, and what you do when motivation fades. If you see yourself as someone who quits when things get hard, effort will feel temporary. If you see yourself as someone who learns and adapts, persistence will feel natural. The same challenge produces different outcomes depending on who you believe you are while facing it. Results-focused thinking often creates a fragile relationship with progress. When success defines your worth, every setback feels personal. Failure becomes threatening instead of instructive. You either push harder in unhealthy ways or give up to protect your self-image. Identity-based thinking changes the question from did I succeed to did I act in alignment with who I want to be. That shift stabilizes effort. You can lose a battle without abandoning the war because your identity is not on trial. Identity also determines what you notice. Your brain filters reality based on self-concept. If you identify as someone who is unlucky, you will notice obstacles more than opportunities. If you identify as someone who is capable, you will notice options and patterns others miss. This is not optimism, it is attention. Identity trains perception, and perception drives action. You do not act on what is objectively true. You act on what you notice and interpret as relevant. Many people wait for results to give them permission to change how they see themselves. They say, once I succeed, I'll believe I'm disciplined, or once I achieve this goal, I'll feel confident. But belief built on results is unstable because results are temporary. Identity built on values and behavior is durable. When you choose to identify as someone who shows up, learns, and follows through, confidence grows from evidence you control, not outcomes you hope for. Identity-based change starts small because identity is shaped through repetition. Every time you act in alignment with a chosen identity, you reinforce it. You are casting a vote for the kind of person you are becoming. One vote does not decide the election, but repeated votes create certainty. When actions and identity align, behavior stops feeling forced. You are no longer trying to achieve a result. You are expressing who you are. This is why habits work best when they are tied to identity instead of goals. A goal says, I want to run a marathon. An identity says, I am a runner. The goal has an endpoint. The identity has a lifestyle. Once the marathon is over, the goal is complete, and behavior often fades. Identity continues to guide behavior long after the initial result is achieved. Results become milestones, not finish lines. Identity also shapes how you deal with discomfort. When discomfort threatens identity, you avoid it. When discomfort is part of identity, you tolerate it. If you see yourself as someone who avoids risk, fear will stop you. If you see yourself as someone who grows through challenge, fear becomes a signal to engage. The situation does not change, the interpretation does. Changing identity does not require pretending or positive affirmations disconnected from action. It requires alignment. You choose the identity you want to live into, and then you take actions that make it believable. You do not say, I am confident, and wait to feel it. You act in ways that a confident person would act, especially when it is uncomfortable. Feeling follows behavior, not the other way around. Results are lagging indicators. They show up after the work has already been done internally. Focusing on identity keeps you patient because you understand that progress is happening even when results are not yet visible. You stop panicking when outcomes are slow because your sense of progress is tied to who you are becoming, not just what you are achieving. That patience allows consistency, and consistency is what eventually produces results. Identity also protects you from comparison. When your focus is on becoming a certain type of person, other people's results lose their power over you. You are no longer racing others, you are reinforcing your own standards. Comparison thrives when identity is weak. Alignment strengthens it. When identity comes first, results become a byproduct instead of a requirement. You pursue excellence not to prove your worth, but because it aligns with who you choose to be. Success becomes something you express, not something you chase. And when results do arrive, they feel earned, stable, and repeatable because they are rooted in an identity that can sustain them. From temporary words to permanent change, the distance is shorter than most people think, yet longer than they expect. Words are often treated as fleeting, emotional, or motivational, something you hear in a moment of inspiration and forget by the end of the day. But words are not harmless. They are not temporary by nature. They become temporary only when they are not acted upon. When words are repeated, believed, and embodied, they stop being sounds and start becoming structure. Permanent change does not begin with dramatic action. It begins with language that is taken seriously enough to live by. Every transformation starts as a sentence, a thought you repeat, a promise you make, a story you tell yourself about who you are and what is possible. Most people collect words the way they collect quotes, speeches, and advice, hoping that exposure alone will change them. But exposure without alignment fades. The words pass through the mind without leaving a mark. The difference between temporary motivation and lasting change is not the power of the words, but the depth of commitment to them. Temporary words excite the mind. Permanent change reshapes behavior. The bridge between the two is repetition backed by action. When you hear a powerful idea once, it can move you emotionally. When you return to it daily and ask, how does this show up in my behavior today? It begins to alter your identity. The mind learns not from what you hear once, but from what you practice consistently. That is how words become beliefs and beliefs become habits. Most people underestimate how much of their life is being shaped by unexamined language. The phrases you use to explain your circumstances, justify your behavior, or describe your limitations slowly harden into rules. This is just how I am. I'm not built for that. It's too late for me. These words may feel temporary in the moment, but when repeated, they become permanent barriers. The brain does not distinguish between casual statements and core truths. It treats repetition as instruction. Permanent change requires replacing unconscious language with intentional language. Not positive slogans, but accurate, grounded statements that invite responsibility. There is a difference between saying I can't and saying I haven't yet. One closes the door. The other leaves it open. There is a difference between saying I failed and saying this attempt didn't work. One attacks identity, the other informs strategy. These small shifts may seem insignificant, but over time they redirect effort, resilience, and self-trust. Words become permanent when they are connected to values. A value is not something you admire. It is something you act on even when it is inconvenient. When your language reflects your values, it gains weight. Saying, this matters to me, means nothing until your schedule, habits, and choices confirm it. When words and actions align, the mind begins to believe them. Belief does not come from repetition alone, it comes from evidence. Every aligned action turns a temporary statement into a lived truth. One of the reasons change feels so difficult is because people try to leap from words to outcomes, skipping identity. They say, I want to be confident, and then wait for confidence to appear. But confidence is not a starting point, it is a byproduct. The permanent shift happens when words describe who you are becoming, not what you are hoping to feel. Saying, I am someone who shows up even when it's uncomfortable, creates a standard. Living by that standard, even imperfectly, builds credibility with yourself. That credibility is what makes change stick. Temporary words also fail because they are often too large. Big declarations feel powerful, but they are hard to sustain. Permanent change grows from language that is specific and actionable. Saying, I will change my life is inspiring, but vague. Saying, today I will take one step that aligns with who I want to be is grounding. The smaller the action attached to the words, the more likely it is to be repeated. Repetition is what turns intention into identity. Consistency is the quiet force that transforms words into structure. When you repeat a behavior long enough, it no longer feels like effort, it feels like alignment. The words you once had to remind yourself of become assumptions. You stop saying, I'm trying, and start saying, this is what I do. That shift marks the moment when change stops being something you manage and starts being something you live. There is also patience required in this process. Permanent change is subtle at first. The early stages look unimpressive. You are practicing discipline before it shows results, integrity before it is rewarded, courage before it is recognized. Temporary words demand immediate proof. Permanent change trusts delayed outcomes. That trust is built when you see yourself honoring your word repeatedly, even without applause. Words also become permanent when they are protected. The environment you allow around you either reinforces or erodes your language. If you constantly surround yourself with voices that contradict your values, your words lose strength. If you create space for reminders, routines, and reflection, your words gain stability. You are not just changing what you say, you are changing what you allow to influence you. From temporary words to permanent change is not a leap. It is a process of alignment. It is choosing fewer words and living them more fully. It is replacing emotional declarations with disciplined repetition. When your words shape your actions and your actions reinforce your words, change stops being something you chase. It becomes something you embody.